In this lesson, we are going to solve equations using inverse operations. That sounds pretty much like what we did last lesson. But this time we're going to do it by balancing. So I want you to think about solving in terms of balancing. So let's back up. Solving equations, we know what an equation is. Solving means we're finding x. So we're going to find x or y or whatever. We're going to find the variable, the value of the variable, by doing something called balancing. So we're going to find x by doing something called balancing. So I would start off the same way we did in the other lessons. I would identify what we start with, which is x, our variable, and then what we did to it. We only added 2. So we know that we did all this to get to 5. We went this direction, but now we got to go opposite, just like we did before. So what's the opposite? What's the inverse of adding 2? We are going to subtract 2. Now, this is what we did last time. We took away 2, and we got 3, right? But let's hold out on writing that 3. So the way equations work, x plus 2 equals 5 is our equation, is that we subtracted 2 from the 5. But this isn't magic. If the left side is equal to the right side of the equation, so if the x plus 2 is equal to the 5, then whatever you do to one side, I guess I shouldn't put it through it, whatever you do to one side, minus 2, you have to do the other side, minus 2. Well, we know that plus 2 minus 2 is 0. So we just end up with x equals 5 minus 2 is 3. It'll get easier the more we do it. So we had x, and we took away 4. I'm just going to write that part. And we got to 16. So we took away 4. To undo that, the inverse operation is plus 4. So we put plus 4 here on the right side of the equal sign. But if we do it to the right side, we need to do it to the left side. So if we do minus 4 plus 4, it's gone. So we end up with just the x equals 16 plus 4 is 20. I'm going to explain this again actually in terms of balancing. I want you to think about this like a scale, like you see in science class, where this side is balanced with this side. Whatever you do to one side of the scale, you have to, in order for them to be equal, you have to do it to the right side of the scale. So I'm going to get rid of that. We had x, and we multiplied it by 2. And we got to negative 12. So to undo this, we have to do the inverse operation. The inverse of times 2 is divided by 2. But we don't really write it like this anymore, okay? Yeah, in all honesty, the only time you see it is when I write it here. The way I want you to write it is like that fraction. So we need to take that negative 12 and divide it by 2. But remember, you do it to one side, you do it to the other, divided by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is going to give us 1. So, and we don't have to write 1x, we can just write x. Remember, we don't have to write 1x. I'll write there for now though. Negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. But remember, that 1, we don't need to write it. So x equals negative 6. I'm going to say it again, x equals negative 6. In this next problem, we had x, and we divided by a negative 3 and got to 2. The inverse of divide by negative 3 is times negative 3. So I'm going to write it on the side, times negative 3. And we do it on both sides of the equal sign. So negative 3, a shortcut would be just to divide it by negative 3, and once again we get 1 and then we're left with x. So 1x equals 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So x equals negative 6. Let me pause for a moment. In the example number 1, we crossed the 2's out because we got 0. In example number 2, we crossed the 4's out because we put them together, we get 0. In example number 3, we crossed these out not because we got 0, but because we got 1, and we don't really need to write the 1. In this one, we crossed out the negative 3's not because we ended up with 0, but because we ended up with 1. And we don't need to write times 1. Like, we don't need to write 1x. We don't need to write 1x because it's anything times 1 is the same thing. Okay, our last 3. So in this one, we start off with a, we divided it by 3, and we subtracted 8. That's why I like to write these numbers sometimes, like that, if they help you. The inverse of minus 8 is plus 8. So I end up with, well, I'm going to do it to both sides. Like I keep telling you, both sides. If you need to draw this line, because it helps, then draw the line. N plus 8 is 18. Negative 8 plus 8, that gives you 0. You end up with a over 3. The opposite of, or the inverse of divide by 3 is times 3. Those become 1, so I get 1a equals 54. 18 times 3 is 54. Okay, example 6. We start off with y, we multiply by 4, we add 30, and then we multiplied by negative 2, because we multiplied by negative 2. So the inverse, multiply by negative 2. The inverse of multiply by negative 2 is divide by negative 2. Oh, I forgot, I'm not going to have y'all write it that way. Divide by negative 2. Divide by negative 2. Remember, this becomes 1, so we don't need to write it because it's just 1 times. So I'm just going to write this. 4y plus 30 equals, negative divided by negative is a positive. 68 divided by 2 is 34. Okay, the inverse of plus 30 is minus 30. 30 minus 30 is 0. And I end up with 4y equals 34 minus 30 is 4. Let me write that a little nicer. And then the inverse of times 4 is divide by 4. Divide by 4. Divide by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1y. And we end up, it's 1, and then we end up with y. 4 divided by 4 is 1. Oh, cool. Y is 1. Last example for this lesson. Don't forget your invisible ones if you end up with something like that. So we have x, we multiplied it by negative 1, we added 25, and then we multiplied by 4, and then we divided all of that by 5. The inverse of divide by 5 is times or multiply by 5. Some people like to write on the side, I'll do that. 5 times all this divided by 5 just gives you 1 times all of that. So 4 times negative 1x plus 25 equals negative times positive is a negative. 20 times 5 is 100. The inverse of times 4 is divide by 4. Divide the whole side by 4. Divide the whole side by 4. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. So we don't have to write times 1 or anything, or divide by 1. So I'm going to bring this down. Negative 1x plus 25 equals negative divided by positive is a negative. 100 divided by 4 is 25. Okay, the inverse of plus 25 is minus 25. Minus 25. Remember both sides. Negative 1x equals negative 25 minus 25 is negative 50. And lastly, the inverse of times negative 1 is divided by negative 1. Divide by negative 1. Divide by negative 1. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1. We don't need to write it because it's times x equals negative divided by negative is a positive 50. That is it. Thank you.